Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. My name is Lena. I'm 37 years old. I live in Washington, D.C., and tonight I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. The ballroom was dazzling, filled with diplomats, military officers, and wealthy patrons. I was supposed to be there, but not for the reasons anyone would think. I wasn't there as a guest. No, I was just a waitress. One of many, seamlessly moving between the clusters of people, carrying trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres. My black dress, simple but perfectly fitted, blended in with the rest of the staff, and my movements were timed with precision. I wasn't meant to stand out, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being invisible. I was supposed to be invisible. But as I moved through the crowd, a voice cut through the low hum of conversation. "Lena, is that you?" I turned and saw my brother, Ethan, standing by the entrance, a glass of scotch in his hand. His eyes scanned me, and a slow smirk spread across his face. "Wow," he continued, clearly enjoying the moment. "What are you doing here? Are you working? I mean, you're really playing the part, huh?" The sarcasm in his voice was thick, and his eyes flickered to the other guests nearby, looking for validation. "Just a waitress, huh?" His laughter was loud enough to attract a few curious glances. I forced a smile, the sting of his words digging into me like a shard of glass. Despite the familiar ache of being belittled, I didn't let it show. I had work to do, bigger work than this. "Yeah, just a waitress," I said, keeping my tone light, though the words felt like acid in my mouth. "But it's a good job, Ethan. You should try it sometime." His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. I didn't need to see his face to know what he was thinking. I had been the problem child for as long as I could remember, an annoyance to him, a shadow to the family. Growing up, he always seemed to overshadow me, to have it all together while I fumbled through life. And now, here I was, working, barely scraping by while he rubbed elbows with the powerful and wealthy. The insult lingered in the air between us, but I didn't flinch. I focused on the task at hand. I was here for a reason, though it had nothing to do with serving hors d'oeuvres to diplomats and nothing to do with Ethan. I glanced around the room, my eyes settling on General Delacroix, who stood at the far side, surrounded by a small group of officials. His posture was rigid, his jaw clenched as he conversed with a few others. A man of power, wealth, and influence. Exactly the kind of man I needed to protect. Because I wasn't here to watch Ethan show off. I wasn't here for family drama. I was here to stop an assassination. General Delacroix was in danger, and no one knew it but me. I moved past Ethan without another word, pretending like the mockery he just threw at me didn't hurt. I could feel his eyes on my back as I approached the general. His conversation had shifted, his hand now holding a glass of champagne. He was just about to take a sip, but I knew what was coming. A deadly poison, hidden in plain sight. I couldn't let him drink it. Not tonight. I took a deep breath, adjusted my tray, and walked toward him. As I neared, I dropped the smile I had been wearing all evening and replaced it with the cold, professional demeanor I had perfected over the years. The world didn't need to know who I really was. I stopped just behind him, my voice barely a whisper. "Nibupa, don't drink that." The general froze, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly, a hint of recognition in his gaze. He didn't acknowledge me outwardly, but his hand tightened around the stem of the glass, and he casually set it down. I took a step back, keeping my eyes on the general, then slowly turned and walked away without another word. My pulse was still racing, but my body was in autopilot mode, moving through the crowd as if nothing had happened. Moments later, military police stormed the ballroom, chaos erupting in a flurry of uniformed officers and startled guests. People screamed, trying to shield themselves from the sudden movement. I heard the name Harold Veit being shouted over the commotion. Ethan's superior officer, had been arrested for espionage and data theft. It had been him. The conspiracy I had been hunting for months was real, and now it was unraveling before my eyes. Ethan's boss had been a part of a larger plot, a dangerous plot, and I had just exposed it. No one in the room had any idea about the true scale of the danger they were in. No one except me. And now, as the room filled with tension and the arrest unfolded, I could feel the weight of the truth I had been carrying for so long. My true identity, CIPHER, had remained hidden for so long. But now, it seemed like everything was coming to the surface. I couldn't stop now, not when I was so close, not when the enemy was standing in front of me, and not when the person who had mocked me earlier, Ethan, had no idea how deep this went. I approached General Delacroix quietly, my footsteps light as I weave through the crowd. The gala was in full swing, with people laughing, talking, and clinking glasses of champagne. Despite the bright lights, the lively chatter, and the orchestral music playing softly in the background, my world felt eerily silent. There was only one thing that mattered right now: preventing an assassination. As I neared the general, I noticed how everyone around him hung on his every word. His tall, imposing figure was surrounded by the country's elite, people who saw him as untouchable, unassailable. But what they didn't know was that he was seconds away from being poisoned, a carefully planned attack orchestrated by someone on the inside. I wasn't here to serve drinks, to make polite conversation, or even to fit in with the wealthy crowd. No, I was here to do something much more important: to protect the general. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I moved with purpose, reaching his side without drawing attention. He was about to lift his glass to take a sip of what could very well be his last drink, and I had to stop it. In flawless French, I whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear, "N'y bois pas, don't drink that." The words hung in the air for a moment. The general didn't flinch. His expression remained calm, but I saw the briefest flash of recognition in his eyes. He set the glass down gently, as if nothing had happened, and returned to the conversation he'd been having, his demeanor unchanged. I stepped back, my role in this brief moment now over. But the tension that settled in the pit of my stomach lingered. I knew what was coming. I had seen this all before. The web of conspiracy surrounding this gala was thickening, and I was the only one who could see it. I turned on my heel and walked away, but I didn't get far. The doors to the ballroom suddenly burst open, and military police stormed in, their heavy boots clacking on the polished floor as they moved with purpose. "Harold, wait!" one of the officers barked. "You are under arrest for espionage and data theft." The room fell into stunned silence. Veit, Ethan's superior officer, was the one who had orchestrated the leak that had almost killed the general. He had been selling classified information to foreign governments, and I had just exposed it. I watched as Veit was handcuffed and led out of the room, the realization of what I had just done settling in like a heavy weight. The conspiracy had come crashing down, and no one but me had seen it coming. And then there was Ethan. He stood frozen at the back of the room, staring in shock as his superior officer was escorted out in cuffs. The shock on his face was genuine. He had no idea that Veit, the man he trusted, had been part of a much larger operation. I turned my back to him, walking further into the crowd as the chaos unfolded behind me. The gala was no longer just a social event. It had become the turning point in a conspiracy that had been brewing for years. And now, with one arrest, the whole operation was beginning to unravel. What no one knew, though, was that Veit was just a pawn in something much bigger, something I was just beginning to understand. I had done my job, saved the general's life, exposed a dangerous espionage ring, but there was more to this story, much more. And as I walked through the room, blending into the crowd once again, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just shifted. The truth had been revealed, but the real battle was just beginning. 3 years ago, I was part of something bigger. Glass Code, an elite cyber intelligence unit, was my life. It was my purpose, the place where I believed I could make a difference. The work we did wasn't just about data. It was about national security, covert operations, uncovering hidden threats. And for a while, I thought I was doing it all for the right reasons. But everything changed the day I found the anomaly. It was a simple glitch at first, a pattern of data that didn't add up, buried deep within the secure network we monitored. As a lead analyst, I was trained to spot these things, and this one stood out. It wasn't just a minor discrepancy, it was a massive leak. Someone had been selling classified information that could cripple our operations right under our noses. I brought it up to my superior, Jonathan. He was my partner, my trusted ally. But instead of taking the matter seriously, he brushed me off. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I dug deeper. I found more, uncovering a trail that led straight to high-ranking officers who were supposed to be protecting this country, not selling out for profit. I didn't know who to trust anymore, but I knew I had to act. I compiled everything: reports, evidence, encrypted files, and tried to alert higher-ups. But instead of being recognized for uncovering the truth, I was accused of mishandling classified data. They turned on me. The very system I had worked so hard to protect betrayed me. I was dismissed from Glass Code, my career destroyed in a matter of days. It didn't make sense. How had it all fallen apart so quickly? The betrayal didn't stop there. My father, a former government agent who had always been a rock in my life, was there to pick up the pieces. He told me to lie low, to take a break, but I didn't listen. I couldn't. He had his suspicions about what was going on, but he wasn't in the position to expose it. He warned me about things bigger than just the leak, but before he could elaborate, he was silenced by the same system that had betrayed me. When my father passed away unexpectedly, I inherited more than just his belongings. I received a mysterious envelope. Inside, there was a key and a note with only one sentence. You know what's coming next. Find the cabin. I didn't understand at first, but when I drove out to the cabin where my father once lived, everything clicked. The air was thick with secrets, and the walls of the cabin seemed to pulse with old memories. There, hidden behind a loose floorboard, I found a cassette tape, a final message from my father. Listening to it was like hearing his voice for the first time in years. His words were cryptic, yet clear. Lena, what I couldn't say before, what I wasn't able to finish, is that glass code wasn't just a front for protecting the nation. It was the perfect cover for something far more dangerous, a conspiracy. And you, my dear, are the key to stopping it. His voice trembled with the weight of his final warning. He had uncovered something terrible, and it had cost him everything. But before he could tell me who was behind it all, the tape ended. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there in the cold, clutching the cassette, my mind racing. Everything I thought I knew was wrong. My father hadn't just been a casualty of some bureaucratic failure. He had been silenced because of the very conspiracy I was now tangled in. What had he uncovered? What did I need to do next? I didn't know the answers yet, but I was determined to find out. My father's final message had set me on a path I didn't understand, but one that I had no choice but to follow. The truth was out there, and I was going to find it, no matter the cost. I stood there in the cold, staring at the walls of my small apartment as the last words of my father's cassette replayed in my mind. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, something in his tone that I couldn't ignore. Glass code is a cover, a perfect one. But don't be fooled, Lena. There are secrets behind it all, dangerous ones. The tape had been the key, the spark that reignited the fire I'd let smolder inside me for years. It had been 3 years since I was kicked out of glass code. I'd been dismissed, accused of mishandling classified data, when in reality, I had uncovered a leak, a massive one. I had tried to expose it, but no one believed me. They said I was the problem, the loose end that needed to be tied up. I was pushed out of the very system I had worked so hard to protect, and they destroyed my career in the process. But my father had been silenced because he'd uncovered the same thing I had. He had been a part of the system, and now I was left to finish what he started. A sudden knock on my door broke my reverie. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. Jonathan. I hadn't heard from him since the day I was forced out of glass code, not in any meaningful way. He was the one person I had trusted, the one person I had confided in during those final days, and yet he hadn't lifted a finger to help me. I opened the door, and there he was, his face as unreadable as it had always been. But there was something else there too, something that unsettled me. Lena, he said, his voice low and measured. We need to talk. I stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He was a shadow of the man I once worked alongside, his once sharp demeanor now dulled by guilt, or perhaps something deeper. I crossed my arms as I stood in the center of the room. It's been 3 years, Jonathan. Where have you been? His eyes avoided mine, flicking nervously around the room before settling back on me. I know you don't trust me, but you need to listen. I raised an eyebrow, the words hanging in the air between us. Listen? You want me to trust you now? After everything? He sighed, rubbing his face in frustration. I had to stay quiet, Lena. You don't understand, I couldn't, I interrupted, my anger bubbling to the surface. You couldn't have helped me? You couldn't have stood by me when they kicked me out of glass code? You let them destroy me, Jonathan? And for what? To protect your own ass? His expression hardened, and he took a step toward me. I didn't want to betray you, but I was trying to protect you. There's more going on here than you realize. I couldn't... Stop, I cut him off, the years of betrayal flooding back. I don't need your excuses, not anymore. I turned my back to him, walking toward the window. The city lights below blurred, the weight of the past pressing on me. You should have helped me. You should have trusted me, but you didn't. Jonathan was silent for a moment, and then finally he spoke again. I did trust you. That's why I came here. Lena, you were right. There's a reason glass code shut you down. There's a reason they covered up the leak. Someone high up in the system is pulling the strings, and it's bigger than you think. I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. What are you talking about? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an encrypted flash drive. This, he said, his voice thick with regret, is the truth. Everything you need to know. The files I stole before they kicked you out. The ones they didn't want anyone to see. He handed it to me, but I hesitated before taking it. There was no more trust between us, not after everything he had done. But this was bigger than us. The information on that drive could change everything. I've been running from this for too long, Jonathan said quietly. But now it's your turn. You need to expose them. Before they do to you what they did to me, his words were like a slap to the face. He had been a coward, hiding in the shadows, but now it seemed like he was asking me to do what he couldn't, to be the person he couldn't be. I nodded slowly, the weight of the decision sinking in. I'll take care of it, I said, my voice calm but determined. But don't expect anything from me. You've made your choice, Jonathan. Now it's time for me to make mine. He nodded, guilt etched on his face. I understand. As I watched him leave, I felt the old, familiar anger surge within me. Betrayed, abandoned. But this time, I wasn't going to let it stop me. This time, I would finish what my father started, and I would expose the corruption inside Glass Code once and for all. I sat down at my desk, the encrypted drive in front of me, my father's warning still echoing in my mind. Don't trust anyone, not even me. It was time to decode the secrets that were meant to stay hidden. Time to uncover the conspiracy that had been waiting for me all along. The weight of my father's final words hung heavily in the air as I listened to the tape again. Each sentence was a revelation, peeling back the layers of a world I hadn't truly understood until now. Glass Code isn't what you think, Lena, his voice had said. It's not just about protecting national security, it's a cover for something far more dangerous. You've been looking in the wrong place, but you need to look harder, Lena. There's a traitor in the system, someone who's been trading data for foreign interests. His voice faltered slightly in the recording, as if he knew the danger of what he was telling me, but he pressed on. Find the pieces. You'll know what to do. Just be careful. Trust no one, not even me. I rewound the tape again, as if somehow it would offer more than it had. My father's cryptic message was the key, but it was still far from a clear answer. Who was the traitor? How far did this conspiracy go? It hit me like a ton of bricks. Derek Voss. Voss was more than just Ethan's best friend. He was someone my family had trusted for years. He was close to Ethan, and by extension, close to me. He had been there at family gatherings, always the charmer, always blending in seamlessly, the kind of man you'd never suspect. But then I thought about the anomalies I'd uncovered back when I was still in Glass Code. The data leaks, the strange transactions that pointed to someone with access to the highest levels of classified information. And Voss. He had always been too close to the heart of the operation. Too involved. Too perfect at staying under the radar. I had never questioned it before, but now, looking back, I realized how easily he could have been the one to trade secrets. The pieces started to fit together in a way that chilled me to the bone. I was jolted from my thoughts when I heard the familiar sound of my phone buzzing across the desk. It was a text from Ethan. I saw the news. What the hell is going on, Lena? Why didn't you tell me? Harold Veit, under arrest? It hit me. Ethan had no idea about any of this. How could he? He was still wrapped up in his world, unaware of the danger that had been looming over us for so long. I took a deep breath and tapped out a reply. It's bigger than you know, Ethan. Veit was just a pawn. There's a much larger operation at play. I hesitated before sending the message. There was so much I wanted to say, but this wasn't the time for a full explanation. Not yet. Ethan wouldn't be able to process the truth right now, not until I had everything in place. A part of me wanted to shield him from the truth. He was my brother, after all. But another part, the part that had been carrying this burden alone for so long, knew I couldn't protect him from the consequences of his own actions. I set the phone down and let my thoughts return to Voss. If he was the traitor, I had to prove it. I had to find the connection between him and Veit, and more importantly, I needed to know how deep this went. I grabbed the encrypted flash drive Jonathan had given me. The data was the last piece of the puzzle. I needed to crack it, to find the hard evidence that would expose everyone involved. But there was something else, something gnawing at me, Jonathan's warning. Trust no one. I replayed his words over and over in my mind. How could I trust Jonathan now, after everything? After he had been complicit in the silence that had let this conspiracy grow, how could I trust anyone, knowing that even the people closest to me might be involved? As I started working on decrypting the files, I could feel the weight of it all. The betrayal, the lies, the years of being kept in the dark. And then, somewhere in the middle of the data, I found it. A name. Derek Voss. There it was, hidden in plain sight. A string of encrypted communications, all leading back to Voss. A few coded messages here, some transaction logs there. But they were enough to confirm my worst fear. Derek Voss wasn't just involved in this conspiracy, he was its architect. And somehow he had managed to keep his involvement a secret for years. My father's warning echoed in my mind again, louder this time. You'll know what to do. I did know what to do. It was time to take down Derek Voss. The time for silence was over. I made my decision. I would expose Voss and everyone else in the operation, and I wouldn't let anything or anyone stand in my way. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was about justice, and it was time to make the truth known. I met Hyon in an old rundown cafe in the heart of the city, a place where the weight of years seemed to seep into the worn wooden floors. He sat in the corner booth, his face partially hidden under the hood of his jacket. Despite his rough exterior, Hyon was an ally, a man I trusted in a world that had few left to trust. His eyes, sharp and knowing, scanned me as I approached, and he motioned for me to sit across from him. Lena, he greeted me, his voice low and gravelly. Been a while. Yeah, I replied, sliding into the booth. I need information, Hyon. Big stuff. Voss and Veet, they're both involved. I need to know everything you've got on them. He didn't flinch. He already knew where this was headed. For years, we'd both been on opposite sides of the fence, but we'd been through enough to know when to align. His debt to me from an old job was paid in full by now, but our connection remained, fueled by a common goal, exposing corruption in every form it took. Hyon leaned in slightly, the familiar tension in his shoulders giving away the seriousness of the conversation. I knew about Veit, of course. The military police and those fancy networks they use, they aren't as tight as they think. Veet was a pawn, just like everyone else in this game. But Voss, he's the one pulling the strings. The weight of his words hit harder than I expected. I had suspected it for weeks, but hearing it out loud made it real. Voss? I repeated, my mind working through the implications. What's he really after? Hyon's eyes darkened as he spoke. Power, money, control. It's never just about the data. Voss has been selling classified military intel to foreign governments for years, the kind of stuff that could destabilize entire regions. He's been manipulating the situation from behind the scenes, keeping a low profile while pulling every string. I absorbed his words, letting them settle. Voss wasn't just involved, he was the architect of this operation. The man I had trusted, who had been in my life for so long, was nothing but a traitor, weaving a web that reached far beyond anything I had imagined. Where do I start? I asked, my voice a little more steady than I felt. How do we take him down? Hyon tapped his fingers against the table, his gaze piercing. We expose him, but it's not going to be easy. Voss has too many connections, too much power. He's been smart. He covers his tracks well. But there's a way to get to him. I've been gathering intel following the trails. I can't do it alone. I looked him dead in the eye. You don't have to. I've already got the pieces. I just need the last one. Hyon nodded, the unspoken agreement passing between us. But then he hesitated. You're going to need Jonathan. You won't be able to crack everything without him. He has access to the files, everything that's encrypted. You'll never get the data without him. My stomach twisted at the mention of Jonathan's name. The last time I saw him, he had walked away, leaving me to fend for myself when I was at my lowest. He had been part of the problem, not the solution. The betrayal ran deep. I don't trust him, I said firmly. He was complicit in this mess. Hyon sighed, leaning back in the booth. I get it, but trust me, he's your only option. If you want to bring Voss down, you need the full set of data. And Jonathan is the key. You don't have to trust him, just use him. The words stung, but I knew he was right. My personal feelings about Jonathan couldn't cloud the bigger picture. This wasn't about me or him anymore. It was about taking down a dangerous conspiracy. It was about justice for the people who had been left in the shadows, people like my father. I'll make him help me, I said, the finality in my voice undeniable. But once this is over, we're done. I don't need him in my life anymore. Hyon's lips curled into a half smile. Fair enough, but be careful, Lena. You're walking into a lion's den with Voss. You can't do it alone. I stood up, determined. I never planned to. As I left the cafe, the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on my shoulders. The conspiracy had cracked open, and now I had to take the final step to expose it. Jonathan would be forced to help me, or else. I walked into the night, my mind already planning the next move. It wasn't just about the data anymore. It wasn't just about vengeance. It was about something deeper, dismantling a system that had poisoned everything I had worked for. I had no choice but to expose the truth. The fight was far from over, and I wouldn't stop until I'd brought down every last person involved. I stood in the back of the ballroom, my gaze sweeping across the crowd. The embassy gala was a well-oiled machine, everyone perfectly placed, everyone acting their part. But beneath the polished veneer, there was a storm brewing. Tonight, everything was going to change. Ethan stood at the far end, talking animatedly to a group of military officers, his laughter loud and boisterous as always. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did the rest of the guests, but I had a feeling that would change soon. The mission had shifted again. It was no longer about just protecting General Delocqua from the poisoning attempt. Now it was about the final confrontation, revealing everything, exposing the conspiracy in front of everyone. It was time for the truth to come to light, no matter how much the world wasn't ready for it. I adjusted my tray, making my way through the crowd with practiced ease. No one noticed me, just as it should be. I had already delivered the warning to Delocqua once, but tonight the stakes were higher. Tonight, everything would be revealed. And Voss? He was the key. I had to take him down before he could slip through my fingers. The general was at the center of the room now, surrounded by his entourage. His glass of champagne was still in his hand, untouched for now, but I could see the subtle shift in the way he held it. He knew something was off, but it wasn't him I needed to worry about anymore. I needed to focus on the real threat, Derek Voss. I caught sight of him near the bar, laughing with a couple of well-dressed diplomats. His easy charm, his unassuming presence, it made him perfect for his role in this operation, a trusted face, the kind of person who could manipulate without raising suspicion. As he turned slightly, our eyes met across the room, and I felt my pulse quicken. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew I was no longer just the waitress. I could see it in the way he hesitated for a moment, his smile faltering. But it was only for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. It was time. I walked toward him, my steps measured. The crowd seemed to part for me as I made my way to the bar. Voss didn't notice me at first, still deep in conversation with a couple of officials. I took a deep breath and adjusted my posture, channeling the persona I had built for this mission, the one that wasn't Lena, the one that was CIPHER. "Mr. Voss," I said softly, my voice low but unmistakable. He turned, surprised to see me standing there. His face remained calm, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. Good, he should be uneasy. I don't think we've met. His tone was polite, but there was a sharp edge to it, a reminder that he knew far more than he let on. We've met, I replied smoothly, my eyes locking with his. You just didn't know me by that name. A flicker of confusion crossed his features, but he recovered quickly, his smile returning like a mask. Ah, I see. And what name might that be? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I glanced down at the glass in his hand. It was still half full, and I could see the hint of tension in his grip, as if he was still debating whether to drink it. CIPHER, I said, letting the name settle in the air between us, watching him carefully for a reaction. Voss's eyes narrowed slightly, a glimmer of recognition finally dawning. It lasted only a split second before he masked it with a neutral expression, but I could tell I had hit a nerve. You're brave, coming here like this, he said coolly, but his voice was laced with something darker now, something that wasn't quite fear, but close to it. I'm not here for you, Derek, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I'm here to finish what I started. The tension in the air thickened, and I could feel the weight of the moment hanging over us. Behind me, I could hear faint murmurs of conversation, but in this small bubble, it was just the two of us. I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He knew that whatever game he had been playing was about to come to an abrupt end. I think you've already made a big mistake, Voss said, his tone now shifting to something colder. You really don't know who you're dealing with. Before I could respond, the doors to the ballroom slammed open with a sudden force, and the military police stormed in, their boots hitting the floor with a force that made every head turn. Derek Voss, one of the officers shouted. You're under arrest for espionage and high treason. The room froze in place. Gasps rippled through the crowd. as Voss's eyes flicked to the officers, his calm demeanor cracking just enough to reveal the panic underneath. He tried to step back, but the officers were already on him, pushing him toward the exit as Voss struggled against their grip. His face twisted in disbelief and rage, but no one in the room moved to stop it. I stood there watching, a cold sense of finality settling over me. Voss, the man I had trusted, the man who had been in my life and my family's life for so long, was being led away in cuffs. His empire was crumbling, and all I had to do was watch as it fell apart. I turned back to the general, who had been watching the scene unfold. His glass, once in his hand, was now abandoned on the table. He hadn't touched it, and I could see the gratitude in his eyes as he met my gaze. "Thank you," he mouthed silently, the weight of the moment sinking in. The room buzzed with whispers, the truth unraveling before everyone's eyes. As Voss was escorted out, I knew that this was only the beginning. The conspiracy had been exposed, but I was far from finished. The game was over, but the war was just starting. And as I walked away, I caught a glimpse of Ethan in the crowd, his eyes wide as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. I knew he had no idea just how deep this ran, but soon he would. I had no intention of explaining it to him, though. Not yet. Tonight I had exposed the truth, but tomorrow the real fight would begin. The package from Ethan sat on my desk, a quiet reminder of everything that had just transpired. It had arrived not long after the dust settled from the gala, the arrests, the chaos, and the exposure of the conspiracy that had infiltrated every corner of my life. Inside the plain brown box was a small French dictionary, worn with age but still solid. My grandmother's, the one she had given to me when I was a child, telling me to always remember the power of language. It was the same book I'd flipped through countless times growing up, trying to memorize the beautiful, complex words, desperately wanting to feel like I belonged to a world beyond my own, a world I never quite fit into. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ethan, the brother who had never once thought I was good enough, had sent this to me. The book had once been a symbol of warmth and family. Now it was a symbol of something much more complicated. I sat down slowly, fingers hovering over the cover. What did this mean? I wasn't sure if Ethan was trying to apologize or if this was some subtle jab at my mission, at everything I had done. He knew that my father's death, the conspiracy I'd unraveled, and the years I spent working in the shadows had all been for the truth. But even now, after everything, he hadn't fully grasped it. He hadn't understood the cost of all of this. I traced the edges of the dictionary, wondering if I should call him, if I should confront him about the layers of betrayal he still didn't see, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. The truth I had exposed was bigger than us, and I had learned the hard way that some things couldn't be undone. My phone buzzed on the desk, pulling me from my thoughts. It was from Hyon. He had been the one to push me forward, the one who gave me the information I needed to bring the conspiracy to light. His text was simple. The data is already circulating. People are waking up to the truth. A sense of satisfaction washed over me, but it was fleeting. The battle wasn't over. I knew that. As I stared at the French dictionary, my mind wandered back to the moments before everything changed. The gala, the poisoned glass, Voss being arrested, all of it, now exposed, but the fight was far from over. The connections ran deeper than I had ever imagined, and there were still too many pieces left to put together. Even though Voss and Veit had been taken down, I knew that they were only part of the puzzle. There were more people involved, more strings being pulled by hands I hadn't even touched yet. My father's final message played again in my mind. He had believed in exposing the truth, just as I did. And now the responsibility of his legacy, of my own mission, rested heavily on my shoulders. I opened the dictionary, flipping through the pages until I found the word I was looking for. Verite. Truth. I smiled to myself, but it wasn't out of joy. It was the kind of smile you have when you know the end of one chapter is just the beginning of the next. Ethan had acknowledged my strength. He'd recognized the truth I carried. But it wasn't an apology. Not really. It was a moment of understanding, but it was still on his terms, not mine. I closed the book gently and stood up, moving to my desk. The next step was clear. I needed to make my father's voice heard. I opened my laptop and navigated to a public transparency portal I had set up weeks ago. With steady hands, I uploaded the encrypted files, everything my father had left behind. The data that would unravel the corruption within Glass Code, the network of traitors, and the men who had betrayed us all. The system confirmed the upload. It was done. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, watching the confirmation that the world would now know what had been hidden for so long. My father's voice would be heard. The truth would echo across the world. But this wasn't the end. I knew that now. The fight wasn't over, and there would be more to uncover, more to expose, more battles to face. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the quiet satisfaction of justice, knowing that I had done what was right. I had uncovered the truth, and now no one could silence it. As I walked away from my desk and glanced out the window at the city below, I realized that I wasn't done. My work had just begun. The silence in my apartment was deafening as I sat before my laptop, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen. I had uploaded my father's final message, his voice, his warnings, his truths, into the public transparency portal. The video was now live, broadcasting to the world. I could feel the weight of it, the magnitude of what I had just done. My father's voice would finally be heard. The quiet justice that had eluded me for years was beginning to unfold. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The urge to click away from the page was almost overpowering, but I didn't. I couldn't. I needed to make sure it was done. The world would know about the corruption within Glass Code, the conspiracy that had poisoned the very system I had trusted, the lives it had destroyed, the people it had manipulated. No more. No more secrets. The video showed my father, his face calm but his eyes filled with urgency. He spoke of the betrayals, of the high-ranking officials involved in a massive espionage ring, of the truth he had uncovered and the consequences he had faced for it. It wasn't just an expose, it was a warning. And now, it was in the hands of the public. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing with the implications. The world had already begun to react. The emails, the notifications, the messages. Each one a ripple in the ocean of change I had unleashed. But it was just the beginning. I knew there was more to uncover, more to expose. My phone buzzed on the desk, and I grabbed it instinctively, expecting another message from Hyon or one of my contacts. Instead, it was a missed call. From Ethan. I stared at the screen, feeling a wave of conflict wash over me. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, and the fact that Ethan was still on the periphery of all this was a constant thorn in my side. He had no idea how deep this went, how far the conspiracy stretched, or the role he had played in it all. I hit the callback button. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Lena," he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "I saw the upload." I didn't speak. I waited for him to continue. "Are you really?" His voice trailed off, and I could hear the disbelief in his tone. "Was it really all true?" I took a deep breath, knowing there was no point in softening the blow. He needed to understand. "It's all true, Ethan," I said quietly. "Everything. You've been living in a world built on lies, and you've been a part of it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him processing everything, his mind scrambling to piece it all together. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked, a mix of anger and something else. Guilt, maybe? "Why didn't you let me in?" I felt a knot tighten in my chest. The pain of betrayal, of the years I had spent watching him turn a blind eye, of trying to protect him from truths that were too ugly for him to see, it all came rushing back. "Because you weren't ready to see it, Ethan," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "You never were. You didn't see how deep the corruption went because you didn't want to. You were too busy with your career, your image." I could hear his sharp intake of breath. "Is that what you think of me? That I didn't care?" "It's not that you didn't care," I responded, my voice softer now, "but you didn't want to see the truth. You didn't want to believe that your friends, your colleagues, people you trusted, were capable of this." I heard him exhale slowly. "What happens now?" I let out a breath of my own. "Now, it's about making sure the truth doesn't get buried again. The world needs to know what happened. But I'm not done yet, Ethan. I'm not done until every last person involved is exposed." I paused, my hand tightening on the phone. "And you, Ethan, you need to look at yourself. You need to realize that you were part of this too. That's the hardest truth of all." Another silence hung between us. I waited, but no apology came. It never would. "Goodbye, Ethan," I said quietly, the finality in my words hanging like a curtain. Before he could respond, I ended the call. I stared at the phone for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling heavily on my shoulders. I had never wanted this. I had never wanted to expose my brother, to force him to confront his own role in everything. But I had no choice. The truth had a way of making everyone face it, even if they weren't ready. The world was waking up to the conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight for so long. But that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I opened the window and looked out at the city, the lights flickering like stars across the dark horizon. The battle I had fought was far from over, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I had done what I set out to do. My father's voice would live on. The truth had been laid bare for the world to see. And now, my quiet war was finally beginning to take shape.